Hello, it's Anna, and today I would like to build some medieval, Renaissance, old-timey houses in The Sims 4. I really want to start bringing more of my gaming life onto this channel, and I thought a good place to start would be with my very favorite challenge from The Sims 2 called the Warwickshire challenge. It's a very complicated challenge. The rule set I think is like 80 plus pages, so it's a lot. But luckily or unluckily, it also requires a lot of building to set up your world. So I thought it might be kind of fun to show you guys some speed builds of the world of the houses I'm making for this challenge, while also starting to discuss the rules. This will probably take multiple episodes because, like I said, the rule set is gigantic. So please let me know in the comments below if you like this format of video, if you want more of a brief summary and then just the speed builds. And yeah, I hope you enjoy learning about this challenge and meeting some of our cast of characters, or at least our initial characters. So without further ado, let's get to building some houses. Alright, so let's start with what is the Warwickshire challenge? So the Warwickshire challenge is a rule set that was written by a simmer named Helwaz. I think it was last updated in like 2010, 2012, something like that. So it's a very old challenge, and like I said, it was written for The Sims 2, so I'll try to adapt it to The Sims 4, but it will be very imperfect. So bear with me. But as stated in the rule set, the purpose of this challenge is to determine whether it is possible to climb the ranks of society according to the principles and merit of hard work, or if one must cheat the system to get ahead. To that end, the challenge will entail trying to manage multiple hardships while seeking to establish a high standing in society. The final goal is to have a clan name, or family name, rise from the level of serf to duke within 10 generations. Or even better, can your family name inherit the throne and rise to the level of king? So essentially a fancy legacy challenge. I think her description of this challenge also provides good flavor text, as it were, so I'm going to go ahead and read that as well. The year is 1600. You are a serf, eking out a hard existence from the soil. Though your life is hard, you love your country and your king, and believe that your place in the natural order of things is ordained by God. If he wills it, a serf who is hard-working may be smiled upon by divine providence, and given a higher place in the natural order of life, though it has never occurred to you, until now, to question your place in the system. However, the world is changing. Everywhere the foundations of feudalism are crumbling. New possibilities are arising for those who are enterprising enough to seize them. But these people, many believe, threaten the natural order and create chaos. Still others maintain that man's destiny is not written in the stars, that one must seek opportunity and advancement where it presents itself, that a new world is emerging, one which favors free thought and trade, and which rewards those who seek to better themselves. These self-made men rationalize that the ends justify the means, and that nature's laws reveal that there is a divine plan for all of creation, but one which rewards those who study her mysteries and who exploit her resources for personal gain. For these new thinkers, knowledge is power, and the keys to power are through intrigue and cunning. Nature, according to them, is a vast repository of resources ripe for the taking, and they are not willing to sit contentedly by in their rightful place and accept their place in the natural order. Such antiquated thinking is for them a nuisance, a foolish belief of their elders. For you, you're not sure about all of this. There have been wild moments when working the soil or fishing in the Lord's ponds that you fancied yourself a duke, but such nonsense didn't amount to much of a real concern. Now, as you see the world changing about you, you consider whether you'd like to change your position in society. This is where the challenge begins. So this house is just about done. It was built for a peasant family. This particular family only consists of 2 Sims, a teenage boy and his grandmother. I'm not entirely sure what happened to the rest of his family. We'll make something up. I don't know, maybe they died of plague or something. there are a lot of deaths in this challenge. There are a lot of deaths that happen in this rule set, so that seems fine. And I guess that this can be our family that we're trying to advance. Although when I've played this rule set before, I've more played it as just a play style. I haven't ever really tried that hard to advance my Sims in the ranking, but maybe we should give it a shot and see. I'll introduce you to them once we actually play their first round, but for now, that will hopefully explain sort of why I've built things in the way that I have. I also want to briefly say that they are serfs, which means that they have very limited opportunities in this world, in this rule set. Namely, they can only work the land, they cannot have jobs, and they owe higher taxes than any other rank in this game, which sucks, I know. In terms of The Sims 4, I'm not entirely sure how this is going to work, because in The Sims 2, we couldn't own livestock, and they're going to start with some chickens. And also in The Sims 2, the gardening skill wasn't worth as much. You couldn't earn absurd amounts of money by gardening. You could only sort of eke by. So we might have to tweak certain things, because in The Sims 4, you absolutely could earn a ton of money gardening, and I don't think I really want that to be the case here. But for now, I'm just going to follow the rule set as is, and we'll make tweaks along the way as we need to. I've already had to change some things just because of the formats of the games, but, you know, it is what it is. So now I want to talk about how this world was set up. How did I end up with this family as our first family? There are two options for setting up your world. You can either go for a hand selection, which is where you decide every single family, every single neighborhood, every single character. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of decisions to make. So I opted for the randomized creation option, or at least semi-randomized creation. So first you need to start creating the regions of the kingdom. In The Sims 2, you literally had a main neighborhood screen, and from that main neighborhood, you could navigate to every other sub-neighborhood. The Sims 4 is obviously structured differently, so I'm just gonna pick one of the neighborhoods to be our main neighborhood. In fact, I'm leaning toward Windenburg because there's the island, which would be a great place to put the castle on. So we'll see. We'll see what I end up doing. But essentially the main neighborhood is just your royal court. So the castle is going to be there along with a cathedral, along with a monastery or convent, a dungeon for lower class prisoners. It's the capital city, essentially. So not a lot of trade goes on there, and not really any farming is the general idea. This is just the royal court. Below those, you have the sub-neighborhoods. So the neighborhood system works way differently in The Sims 4 versus The Sims 2. So instead of creating sub-neighborhoods, which you had to do in The Sims 2, I'm just going to pick a few to start out with, and we'll add more as we go along according to the rule set. So what I decided to do is I chose to start with 2 rural sub-neighborhoods and 1 town or commercial sub-neighborhood. This makes sense to me in terms of a Renaissance kingdom structure, because you're going to have a lot more serfs and peasants farming than you are merchants trading, and more merchants trading than you are going to have gentry and nobles. So for that feudal structure, this makes sense for me. In this rule set, each sub-neighborhood is ruled by a duke, and below this sub-neighborhood you have fiefs. For the purposes of this challenge, I'm going to consider each sort of named region within a neighborhood as a fief. That will just make it much easier for me to figure out where things should go for this challenge. As stated in the rule set, in the Middle Ages, titled gentry and nobles held large estates and oversaw the ruling of fiefs, or large tracts of land held by the crown. To simulate this, it is recommended that you divide residential sub-neighborhoods into estates, each held, quote-unquote, by a titled noble. Large estates may contain smaller tracts of land. I.e. a dukedom, which is an entire sub-neighborhood, could contain several nested estates, like baronies or counties. This automatically sets up a sort of pyramid structure. So in feudal times and in this rule set, you have your serfs or peasants who pay their taxes to their lord, and their lord pay their taxes to their duke, and the duke pays the taxes to the crown. And that is kind of how money shifts up the social ladder. And at each stage, the taxes are somewhat reduced. So the poor serfs, they have the least amount of money and they pay the highest taxes. But that's just kind of how this works, unfortunately. In order to figure out exactly what types of nobles we're going to have, I rolled a 6-sided die, and that gave me both the number of fiefs and also which titles we have at the start of the game. Titles can be purchased later directly from the crown. They can be awarded for favors. There's a whole royal favor system in this rule set. Like I said, this rule set is extremely complicated, but essentially there will be more created as we go on. These are just to start. And I'm going to get more into which noble titles we have exactly once we actually start building the noble houses, instead of just the peasant home you saw me build before and the bourgeoisie home you're seeing me build now. This home is going to be for a musician and his family. So they're doing okay for themselves, but they certainly aren't wealthy merchants. They aren't gentry. They're typical citizens who are just getting out of farming and getting into working jobs. The next step, once you have the overall structure of your neighborhood decided, is to create the characters. They suggest starting with the royal family. I've never done that when I've made kingdoms for this rule set. I tend to start with my peasants, slowly working my way up to the king and queen. I don't really know why. I think it's mostly just that smaller houses with less money are simpler and quicker to build versus the castle, which always is a pain. I like having the castle once it's done, but it's a pain to make. So I tend to start with the poorer families first. But even for these families, I did decide to randomize it. So I rolled an 8-sided die to determine how many Sims in each household, and from there randomized gender, aspirations, and traits. So for this family, we ended up with a bunch of kids. I'm forgetting how many, but we have several children. We have a single father, a teenage son who's set to take over the family business, and at least one daughter. Oh, this is bad. I should have checked before recording, but oh well, we're here now. We'll find out in a little bit. So after you have made all these randomized rolls, what comes next is a lot of building. So I'm gonna split up explaining the rule set over all of this building. Please let me know if this is interesting to you or if you'd rather just have the speed builds and I can talk about something else. But for now, I'm just going to plan on showing the building and talking about how this whole system works. I do think it's a decent approximation of a Renaissance kingdom. I think that Helwaz, I think that's how you say her name, I'm not entirely sure, but I think they did a great job with their research. They clearly love this time period. And so yeah, I think it's pretty good, but obviously it's not going to be perfect. Notably for both of these builds, you'll see I have an outhouse. That part is accurate. Indoor plumbing really wasn't a thing until very recently. People did use chamber pots, which were literal pots that you did your business in at night when you don't want to be stumbling your way out to the outhouse, but there was not indoor plumbing. Not at all. Not even close to what we think of now. That didn't come along until much later. It wasn't that common until well into the Victorian period, especially in more rural places. So people used outhouses for a long time. The other inaccuracy in this area that is a constraint of The Sims is using baths or water at all to clean oneself. At this time, they didn't do that. People cleaned themselves by using clean cloths. But despite not using water or soap, they didn't stink. I know this is a common misconception shown time and time again that, oh, people back then, they just had dirt all over them and they smelled. They didn't. That's false. They didn't smell like modern cosmetic products, so they didn't smell like deodorant, they didn't smell like soap. But they weren't dirty. It's actually pretty effective to just clean yourself with a dry method using cloths. This method is explained much more in depth by Ruth Goodman on the Tudor Monastery Farms program. I highly recommend all of the Historic Farms programs by BBC. They're fantastic. This particular program also really delves into why people wouldn't use water to wash in the first place. And what it comes down to is fear of disease. At this time, they believed that water opened up the pores, and if the pores were opened, that exposed the person to disease. And think about it. If you lived in a time when plague and sweating sickness were carrying people off in droves, you probably would be scared of doing anything that might expose you to disease too. And if you believed water could do that, you might also avoid using water to bathe unless you absolutely had to. And I think that's a general mistake we make looking at history from our viewpoint and our lens. We sort of pretend that these people are silly or stupid, or we are so much more advanced. And while we are more advanced, that doesn't mean that people of the past were stupid or silly, or that what they were doing didn't make sense in the context of their knowledge and their belief system. I think in general we sort of act like people in ye olden days are wildly different than people now. I think we make a similar mistake with people of other backgrounds, and that just isn't true. People are people, and throughout the ages and throughout different cultures, although there are differences, at the end of the day we have the same intelligent minds, we have the same capacities in general as human beings, and I think it's really important to remember that. So throughout this series, I'm going to try to do research and delve into the history of why were these the practices? Did it make sense? What has changed? And yeah, I think that'll add a little spice to the building. Getting back on track, in addition to not washing their bodies with water, they also didn't wash their hair with water or soap, at least not very often. This doesn't mean their hair was gross. They just had different methods of caring for it. And primarily what they did was to use combs of different sizes to get the dirt out, to get the oil out, and it does work. So you know how at the store you can find like a wide tooth comb that's good for detangling, and then also narrower combs? The narrower combs will pull a lot of oil and dirt out of your hair. Modern ones don't work particularly well because they're plastic, and plastic doesn't absorb things and it doesn't move things through the hair as effectively. But in the Tudor time period and in the Renaissance time period, combs were made of bone or horn or wood, and these natural materials did do a really good job of moving dirt through and out of the hair, distributing oils to the ends, which are drier, and really cleaning the hair very effectively. They would also use boar bristle brushes. I'm not entirely sure when these first came into use, but they were in common use up through the Edwardian period. And these also work. I have very long hair. I don't wash it with water that often. What I do use are brushes and combs in between, and it keeps my hair clean. It works. The other advantage that Tudor and Renaissance people had to keep their hair clean was wearing caps and hats. People of this time period didn't go around with their heads uncovered. At least most of the time they didn't. Especially women, their hair just was not uncovered. So this meant that it was protected. There was a clean cloth on your head. That is what's making contact with your hair, and you aren't being exposed to all the dirt and pollutants in the air, because they did have pollutants. That's another myth, that pollutants are only a modern phenomenon. We just have different ones. At that time, the pollutants were wood smoke and eventually coal, whereas now we have smog and we have different sorts of pollutants, but they still had pollutants. Humans have basically always had pollutants, and it's another way that we're much more similar to our ancestors than we might think. So I think we're coming to the end of this speed build, so that'll do it for me today. If you liked this video, give it a like. I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Let me know if you have any fun historical facts from this time period, if you like the builds, if you don't like the builds, are you excited for this challenge? Any thoughts that you have, I would love to hear them down below. If you want to see more from me, you can subscribe to this channel. You can also follow me on social media. In particular, I stream on Twitch Monday through Thursday, starting at noon Pacific Standard Time, and usually going until about 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. But that is subject to change, especially if we're having a good time. I frequently go later than that. I'd love to see you there. I'd love to say hello. And with all of that being said, I hope you have a wonderful day with whatever your endeavors are, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.